Welcome to Electrified. It's your host, Dylan Loomis. A quick shout out to Eric F. Thank you for choosing to use my Tesla referral link, and congratulations on your new Tesla. Just FYI, there are now 4 uses left for my referral link. It's always in the description if you need one. Dan Priestley from Tesla also sat down with Dan Antonovic, who's the head of electrification at Pepsi, and here are the highlights. If I say Dan, I'm referring to the one from Pepsi, whereas if I say Priestley, I'm of course referring to the Dan from Tesla. Priestley reiterated that the total cost of ownership is the basis for every decision Tesla makes with the Tesla Semi. Part of how they drive down that figure is using the same screens from the other Tesla vehicles, and they also use some of the same powertrain parts as well, and volume for these parts of course helps to drive down price. Dan said there's been a lot of excitement about the Tesla Semi adoption at Pepsi, and it's even surprised the electrification manager himself how well received the Tesla Semi has been. Everybody's been talking about the turn radius of the Semi, which is great for city driving, but they've proven that EVs can work in both the regional and the long haul settings as well. Basically, Pepsi has 3 different fleets, if you will. They have some short range in city driving, they have some longer range regional driving, and then in both of those they have some lighter loads and some heavier loads, which means Tesla's been able to test the Semi in all of these different scenarios. Dan confirmed that Pepsi's highest mileage trucks are actually in the beverage business, which they also refer to as their transport division, and those routes have the heavier loads and the longer distances. As it turns out, Pepsi has more semis from Tesla than I think we were expecting. Pepsi has now launched 3 depots across California, one in Modesto where they have 15 Tesla semis deployed, one in Sacramento where they have 21 semis deployed, 18 of which are for local routes, and then 3 are the long haul and more regional. And the 3rd depot is in Fresno where they're now deploying 50 trucks. 45 are city and local, 5 are for regional long haul. Add those up and that gives us 86 Tesla semis that Pepsi has deployed. The original contract was for 100, so 14 more, and that will actually be fulfilled nearly 7 years after being agreed to. Priestley confirmed with Jan from the EV universe that Tesla does already have a few of the shorter range Tesla semis already in the United States. On the efficiency front, Dan highlighted 0.8 kilowatt hours per kilometer, which is 1.29 kilowatt hours per mile when it comes to the lighter load routes for the semis they've deployed. And on the heavy duty load side, Dan said that they're at 1 kilowatt hour per kilometer, which is 1.6 kilowatt hours per mile. I think that's why Elon said on X, it looks like we can get the kilowatt hours per mile down around 1.2 with the median semi load, which means Tesla may be sandbagging a bit on their Tesla Semi page as they're still listing 2 kilowatt hours per mile energy consumption. Dan from Pepsi said with over a year of testing, they're at 1.6 kilowatt hours for the heavier loads. And a 900 kilowatt hour pack for the Semi divided by 1.6 kilowatt hours per mile would be roughly 562 miles. Priestley also confirmed with Jan from the EV universe that Tesla will never do CCS for the Semi, so they are going to stick to the megawatt charging standard even in Europe. If you hear somebody referring to behind the fence charging, that's really synonymous with depot charging, and that's what Pepsi's been focusing on, these charging sites at Pepsi locations for Pepsi. At those depot sites, Dan confirmed they do have megapacks at each location. And that depot charging is in contrast with public charging, which Priestley said may be more popular across Europe, since land and space may be more of a premium. Now, one thing that Dan did admit has been a challenge was infrastructure. Dan said they're now expecting that 1.5 years is going to be the bare minimum to launch a megawatt scale project, and in reality it's more like 3 years to actually set up that charging infrastructure. So Pepsi is now installing their own megawatt level charging at their sites for that depot charging, but it could take up to 3 years per site. I don't want to read too far into this, but I'm starting to think that the way Tesla is going to be working with their first customers, really with kid gloves to help them get set up, not just with charging and infrastructure, But with service, which we'll touch on shortly, I think maybe we should start to expect a slower rollout than maybe some already expect. So if you think Tesla at Giga Nevada will even hit a run rate of 50,000 per year by the end of 2026, that may be optimistic. No fault of Tesla's, but the infrastructure utility side may be the limiting factor for these companies adopting semis at scale, at least to begin. Other than that, though, it really was all positive. Dan shared a story about a lifetime diesel driver that now feels like a kid in a candy store with a Tesla Semi, and he said he did not want to go back to diesel. He said it's been a success overall, and Pepsi is continuing operations with the Tesla Semi, and it's matched the duty cycle of their diesel trucks where they can operate in the same fashion without skipping a beat. Of course, the more Pepsi uses these Tesla Semis, the more the fuel savings will add up, and he confirmed the maintenance has been an improvement so far relative to the diesel fleet. Priestley then shared that Tesla will in fact be able to largely use its existing parts distribution network for Tesla Semi service, which should really help to keep the service times short. Pepsi has 3.8 million kilometers traveled on these Tesla Semis, which is about 2.3 million miles. And Priestley confirmed that Tesla is in the midst of setting up a service center near Pepsi's Fresno location, but they're also going to start transferring over some of Tesla's servicing responsibility to Pepsi. So Tesla will be training Pepsi employees so they can actually do service in-house on their own, ultimately giving companies the option going forward to lean on Tesla service or learn how to do it themselves. Again, shout out to Jan for a lot of the coverage from this event. He was actually there in person, and some of the other electric trucks, or Tesla's competition, are literally using twice or more energy to travel every mile on the same conditions. There was a lineup of the other electric trucks in this video. A lot of them were shaped just like these two that you can barely see in this video. A lot of them have these flat, square-faced designs, which I'm guessing can't be that aerodynamic. Pair that with Tesla's efficiency we've been talking about for years, so it's really no surprise that they'll be leading the industry with a Semi as well. Both Dans were candid about some of the challenges that they had to work through together, but that's part of why I think this learning time and experience for Tesla will be so valuable when it comes to expanding to other customers. Rather than struggling through with multiple customers at once, Tesla can do it with one close, trusted partner, hopefully work out a lot of the kinks, and then go from there. To cap it off, Elon said, compared to diesel, Tesla semi-trucks have a lot more acceleration, uphill power, and computer-controlled safety features like jackknifing protection, so both more fun and safer to drive. Apparently, some third-party companies are now releasing NACS DC extension cords. However, PSA West said would recommend against using an extension cord on a supercharger or any DC charging station with a liquid-cooled cable. Have seen multiple instances of the cable overheated. Morgan Stanley put out two new Tesla stock notes today, and in the first highlighted how Tesla's competition is funding its future. Ford has said it's accumulated firm commitments to buy around $4 billion of ZEV credits in the years ahead. Based on Morgan Stanley estimates, as much as 50% of these credits would be potentially bought directly from Tesla. Therefore, in an effort to reduce emissions, Ford would buy ZEV credits from Tesla, which are 100% margin to Tesla, which Tesla would in turn use to add its own power-hungry and CO2-emitting AI supercomputers. Is it just us, or does that seem ironic? I have to admit, they kind of have a point. Another way to say it, Ford is being punished for not hitting its emission targets. Meanwhile, that punishment or that penalty is going to Tesla, which will likely actually fund their data centers, which have huge greenhouse gas emissions. Morgan Stanley's team has estimated that from this year through 2030, there will be 2.5 billion tons of CO2 incrementally added from these hyperscaler data centers. That number is roughly equivalent to 2.5 years of total CO2 emissions from the combusted gasoline of US automobiles. So it's fair to ask, is the auto industry being forced to clean up its act really just to make room for the data centers to then repollute? It's true, a lot of these hyperscalers have talked about net zero targets, but that's years into the future, so as it stands now, a lot would need to change to hit those goals. So I'd say for the climate climate and emission purists, this is somewhat of an alarming reality. And not to just brush that off, but maybe as a silver lining, this could create another big opportunity for Tesla to decarbonize that industry with Tesla Energy, Megapack, Powerwall, solar, etc. But it has to be painful for Ford knowing they're about to hand over $4 billion to Tesla that will help fund Tesla's future, and ultimately further its lead over Ford. In the next note, they said when it comes to the 10/10 event, frankly, we're struggling to see how the day can live up to investors' high expectations. They're looking for safety data, which personally I'm not sure we're going to get. They want improvement from recent iterations of FSD, which we're seeing happen in real time already and is very geography dependent, and the methodology or how Tesla plans to further drive improvement in FSD. But the answer is more compute, better data, and continuous training. But there really has been a shift across parts of Wall Street in that they're saying Tesla's upside requires AI execution. Tesla's future valuation is highly dependent on its ability to develop, make, and commercialize autonomous technologies. Translation: car sales are not nearly as relevant as they once were, as a majority of the eyes and the big money is focusing on FSD and Optimus. They called out that prices vary, but most estimates have an H100 chip at around $30,000. So for a 100,000 H100 cluster, that would be $3 billion. We calculate the Colossus supercomputer that xAI has in Memphis consumes 374 gigawatt hours every year. The average US household consumes 10.9 megawatt hours of electricity annually, which means just the first half of the Colossus capacity consumes an energy equivalent of more than 34,000 households, closer to 50,000 when including other data center electricity uses like thermal. At the very least, I think it's some food for thought. As Tesla fans, I'm guessing most of us are somewhat tech savvy as well. We put a fair amount of personal information online to buy a product or pay a bill or create an account on whatever site. And sadly, that's not where the data sharing stops. This figure is just astounding. The projected figure for this year, the value of the data broker industry is expected to be over $389 billion with a B. It's estimated there are around 5,000 data brokers working around the world, and in the US, there are currently 1,711 registered data brokers. It's very possible there are even more because they're not required to be registered by state laws. If you like wild stats, here's another one. According to the Federal Trade Commission, romance scammers alone stole $1.14 billion from Americans last year alone. Luckily, if you want to protect yourself and your family from all of this nonsense and you want to opt out of these companies selling your private information, there's an easy and quick way to do that, and that's signing up for Delete Me, the sponsor of this video. Delete Me is an American-based company that I spent ample time researching before partnering with them. They've been in business for over a decade, and they specialize in removing all of your personal information from all of these data brokers, and they constantly monitor these sites to ensure your data stays off of these websites into the future. Every quarter, Delete Me sends you a new report showing exactly what's been removed, from where, and they share the status of your current removal for every single data broker. A quick look at my August report, they reviewed over 3,700 listings and found that 23 data brokers had my personal information, of which they removed. Between the searching and removing, that likely saved me over 60 hours of time. And sadly, it's important to do this quarterly because, as we highlighted, new data brokers are continually popping up. I think it's an awesome US company doing great work to push back some of the darkness in the world, so if you'd like to take your privacy back for your family, you can get 20% off using my code Electrified. You can head to joindeleteme.com/electrified, or you can use the QR code right on the screen. After a few delays, GM put out a press release saying that their drivers will now have access to the supercharger network, specifically over 17,800 chargers. Full disclosure, this is not all of the ports available in the USA and Canada. Supercharge.info has Tesla's open US stalls at 27,700 and an additional 2,200 in Canada. We can round up and call that 30,000 ports. Thus, GM is only getting access to about 60 60% of the available ports. I'm guessing a lot of the supercharger sites that are already busy are not going to show up on the GM app. The GM approved NACS adapters will first be made available to customers in the US, followed by availability for Canadians later this year. GM customers will have to pay for this adapter at a price of $225 US. But GM customers can use the same app they're already using to check available Tesla locations, check station status, start the charge, and pay for the sessions. GM plans on leveraging multiple suppliers to produce approved NACS adapters. In the future, Ford is going to move to start charging its customers for the adapter, but I believe the window to request a free one goes until the end of September. And I believe if you buy a new Ford, you still get a free adapter. It's now Ford, Rivian, and GM that all have access to the supercharger network. Next up in line, it's Volvo, Polestar, Nissan, and Mercedes-Benz. I did find that some Chevy Bolt EV owners will need a software update to actually use a supercharger. And if I were to have a concern about GM having access, it would probably be around the Chevy Bolt. I believe the max charging speed of those vehicles is about 55 kilowatts. And this is by far GM's most sold EV. However, the share of Ultium-based EVs that GM is selling is growing. In Q2 of this year in the United States, over 20,500 Ultium-based EVs were sold, which was about 94% of the EVs they sold. Yes, this is awesome for the overall EV transition. However, I'll be honest, I do have my reservations over the next 2 years. I'm kind of already dreading the day when I show up at a supercharger location and it's full of non-Tesla EVs. I know it's selfish, but that really was an awesome perk for Tesla customers. I've been looking out for FSD 12.5.3 updates, and Tech Geek Tesla had a great video. Spoiler alert, there was some good, but also some bad, and we'll start off with FSD running a red light.
These things just shouldn't happen right here. So, goes right through that red light. Now, some of you may be like, oh well, but I think the vast majority are going to agree with me that it should not be doing those things.
This was downtown Chicago during a Mexican celebration, so it was pure chaos.
You're going to see that traffic cop, he's directing some people to cross the road. And then after this, there's a tunnel. But before we get to the tunnel, you're going to see this traffic cop gets back onto the intersection and the light is green. The car can go forward, but that same guy that you just saw there, he kind of comes forward toward the road a little bit. Watch this, right there. And my car reacts a little bit late to that movement and results in me doing the third intervention. So there you can see he steps forward as if he's going to go into the intersection, and it slowed way down. I really had to step on the accelerator to get through there. I'm here at a four-way stop. It's just stop signs, but my visualizations show a red light. I didn't notice this until afterwards. It's not a red light. It's like a construction artifact that's sitting on top of a stop sign, and my car processes it as a red light and just will not go forward. Here, a very basic blinking red light, and it's not moving forward. Now, I don't mean to be pessimistic or disappointed with all these things, but we're on version 12.5.3, and if it can't handle blinking red lights, that's a little bit of an issue, in my opinion.
In fairness, there were some good clips too, but at this point, I'm far more interested in seeing where it's still struggling. The Treasury Department has put out some much needed clarification when it comes to how the credits will work for EV chargers. To date, it's been unclear if these tax credits would apply to an entire EV charging station or each individual port. This clarification says it's a per port basis, which means companies can claim it multiple times for a charging station. The tax credit is 30% off the cost of installing the charger, up to $100,000 for companies, and then for individuals, they can get a credit for 30% off their costs, up to $1,000 per port. However, this credit only applies in areas that are either low income or are not urban. As always, double check with your tax professional, but they did put out this eligibility map that I will have linked below. Earlier this year, Ford executives made a trip to China to assess the EV market firsthand, but were still getting leaks or details about that visit. Earlier this year, we talked about how Farley described the situation competing against the Chinese as an existential threat to Ford. Now they're telling us Farley is also saying that executing to a Chinese standard is going to be the most important priority. Ford CFO John Lawler said, "Jim, Farley, this is nothing like before. These guys are ahead of us." Farley is saying that the Chinese are pulling away in the EV race. Shortly after the trip, Farley arranged to have Chinese EVs shipped to Michigan for executives and directors to check out and sit in. One was from Xiaomi, which means it's the SU7. The summary: those experiences persuaded Farley to narrow Ford's focus in China to commercial vehicles rather than trying to compete with local manufacturers in the consumer market. You guys know I love the candor, and I think this will serve Ford well in the long term, acknowledging the reality of their current situation. Rivian has launched a new certified pre-owned program on its website. These vehicles are inspected by Rivian, road tested, and they get a factory warranty. They get a 4-year or 60,000 mile comprehensive and a 7-year or 175,000 mile warranty for the battery pack and drivetrain. They're offering a return policy for the first 7 days. Right now, the cheapest R1T is $62,300 and the cheapest R1S is $71,100. But these CPOs currently cannot be leased, and this is only available in California and Illinois. Tesla stock closed the day at $227.20, down 0.29%, while the Nasdaq was down 0.31%. It was a normal volume day, trading about 3 million shares above the average volume the past 30 days. The Fed did cut interest rates by 50 bips today, but I've said in the past, I'm not sure this is going to have the outsized impact on Tesla sales that I think some are hoping for. Yes, overall borrowing costs should come down, but Tesla's been offering low APR financing, so maybe they do save some margin here. But I'm not sure 50 bips is going to be a real needle mover, and then from a market perspective, a large portion of it was already expecting a 50-point cut. I'm no economist, nor do I pretend to be, but just for fun, I'm reading a 50 basis point cut as an indication that maybe they think they waited a bit too long to drop. Don't forget, check out Delete Me linked below to take advantage of that discount. If you do, as always, thank you very much in advance. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. Please like the video if you did. You can find me on X linked below. And a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters.